America, but in the entire world. So welcome to beautiful Denver for this Celebrate Life March and Rally. To get us started, please welcome to the stage the St. John Vianney Seminary Choir under the direction of Dr. Mark Waller. Make them feel welcome. Thank you very much to the St. John Vianney Seminary Choir, and also I want to make sure we thank the Our Lady of Lourdes worship team that led us in music as we were gathering. Can we give them all a round of applause? Now, an important item of business. The porta potties are right over there. If you need to make use of them, your right, my left, that's where those are kept. So please avail yourself of those as needed. So why are we here today? Why are we gathered here on a Saturday when we could be doing so many other things? Why when it's cold? Why when there's snow on the ground? Why when it's uncomfortable do we come here to this place? It's because you and I recognize that there's a crisis throughout our entire nation, and that crisis was unleashed right here in this building we gather in front of. Because in 1967, a young state legislator named Dick Lamb introduced in this building the measure to decriminalize abortion in the state of Colorado. And regrettably, that measure was enacted into law and opened up a Pandora's box as Colorado became the first state to allow abortion to be legal. And over those next few years, that crisis began to spread throughout our nation until on January 22nd, 1973, that fateful day, when 7 men on the United States Supreme Court imposed abortion through raw judicial power on the rest of the nation. What began here has led to the slaughter of more than 60 million innocent American children. And abortion today is the leading cause of death in America. So we gather here because we realize there's a crisis. But we are not a people to despair. Because as followers of Jesus Christ, we are a people of hope. We know there is hope that is in Him that is greater than that which is of the world. And even in the midst of this crisis, even as lives continue to be lost to this very day, we have seen through the prayers and efforts of faithful people here in Denver, throughout Colorado, and around the nation, the tide is turning for life. This month alone, 76 marches for life are happening coast to coast across America. Record numbers of people are coming out and standing up for life, including the hundreds of thousands who will gather on the National Mall this coming week in Washington, D.C. In 1991, the abortion industry reached its pinnacle. They had just shy of 2,200 abortion centers across America. That number, through the prayers and efforts of God's people, has dropped today to fewer than 600. 79% of the abortion centers in America have closed their doors and gone out of business. The abortion rate continues to drop. Young people are more pro-life than previous generations. Americans self-identify as pro-life by the largest majority since Roe versus Wade. More pro-life laws are being passed in states over these last 3 years than the previous 30 years before that. We are seeing the tide turn, and with changes on the United States Supreme Court, we realize the days of Roe versus Wade are numbered. Abortion is going to end. But our work is not yet done, and that's why we gather here. In just the last year, 8,873 children lost their lives to abortion in your home state of Colorado. As we are gathered here today, 24 more will die, 24 more the next day, and 24 more the day after that. And we are gathered here to say enough is enough. What began here in this place must end here in this place. And we are the people called by God for such a time as this. This will end, and you are the people. In 2007, when 40 Days for Life was just getting started, we had this crazy vision that maybe it would become this national thing with like 15 or 20 cities joining together in prayer vigils outside abortion facilities. We put the word out, inviting other cities to be a part, thinking, wow, this will be amazing to see what happens. One of the first cities that signed up for that initial 40 Days for Life campaign was a city halfway across the country from here. And little did we know that one man in that city would change the entire trajectory of that one ministry. Because the Catholic bishop of that city, when he heard about 40 Days for Life, he wrote a pastoral letter to his priests in his diocese. And he challenged them in that letter, and he said, I want you each to commit to 1 hour outside of that abortion facility in our city during those 40 days. And some of his priests were 2 or 3 hours drive away from that city. But he encouraged them to come anyway, because he said there are women in your towns and cities who are going to come that distance to have an abortion. The least we can do is come to be there to offer them hope and help. But not only did he challenge them to commit to an hour, he led by example. And he told them, here is the day, here is the hour, I will be out there myself. That is heroic leadership. And that man changed the entire trajectory, because Catholic media and then religious media picked up on his letter he'd written to those priests. People across the country were inspired by his leadership. And 40 Days for Life didn't open up in 15 or 20 cities. It started in 89 cities in 33 states. And since that time, it's exploded to 816 cities, all 50 American states and 56 nations. I believe this man was a key figure that God used to help that trajectory of upward growth. And he is our next speaker here today. Because after serving as the Bishop of Fargo, North Dakota, in 2012, he was installed as the Archbishop of Denver, returning home to the Archdiocese where he was ordained a priest in 1976 and spent 25 years as a priest. His motto comes from Mary's instructions at the wedding feast in Cana, where Jesus was performing his first public miracle. And Mary said, do whatever he tells you. This man has lived that by example, and he challenges all of us to do whatever Jesus tells you. Please welcome my hero and yours, the Archbishop of Denver, Colorado, Archbishop Samuel Aquila.
Thank you very much. It is always edifying to see so many of you here, especially after yesterday's weather. And the Lord answered our prayers and gave us nice weather today. Have you ever compared the difference between a candle in the daylight and the same candle at night? They both give off the same amount of light, but the absence of light makes that candle seem so much brighter. When it comes to the support of our, even in our landscape, when we look up at the foothills from the city, or we are looking down from the mountains, our cities and their lights stand out. As people who strive to protect human life at every stage, we are called to be like this city on a mountain, to be the light of the world in these dark times. God has willed for us to live. Just like a lamp on a stand, Jesus says to each one of us today, your light must shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your heavenly Father. There are many areas in which the light of the truth is being suffocated, and especially in our own state of Colorado. We see that in the meaning of the human body and sexuality, in the goodness and dignity of life at every stage, and the lack of belief in the truths that God has woven into creation. In this past midterm election, some of those lawmakers who were in support of the church's teaching in these key areas failed to win their seats, which makes our task today of remaining vigilant and engaged all the more important. And it is you, the laity, who need to make your voices heard. There are still politicians in the new legislature that believe as we do, and others who are willing to work with us on certain issues, even if we have other disagreements. We must not let these disagreements prevent us from working together when we can. During this legislative session, we hope to see an effort to repeal the death penalty in Colorado, a measure that the church has long advocated for, since our prison system can ensure these criminals pose no danger to the public once they are incarcerated. We also know that men who have been condemned to death have converted and have changed. They have opened their hearts to the one who can give them life. All life has dignity and worth, even the lives of those who have killed others. The state should not participate in the cycle of violence by taking life, but should instead strive to protect it. In 1957, Martin Luther King Jr. gave a sermon on loving our enemies, illustrating this teaching of Jesus. He stated, "Returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." Those words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. need to be heard by both sides of the aisles today, with all of the rhetoric that we see present among both Democrats and Republicans. In the viciousness of some of their statements, they reflect a lack of belief in God. They reflect a lack of civility. They reflect hatred that has no place in a civil society. As I stand here in front of the Capitol, I challenge you also to be vigilant and remain engaged as the legislature considers bills that could profoundly change our state's laws in the arena of life, as well as how our state interacts with issues of sexuality, which are closely linked with life. On the surface, it might seem like sexuality and the protection of life at all stages are not related, but sexuality is closely linked to our identity as co-creators with God. They share deep roots. The evil one hates God, so it should be no surprise that he takes every opportunity to distort and confuse human sexuality in our society and in the minds of people. It should not surprise us that he encourages efforts to devalue and destroy life as well. Pope Francis, in his apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium, had this to say: among the vulnerable for whom the Church wishes to care with particular love and concern are unborn children, the most defenseless and innocent among us. Nowadays, efforts are made to deny them their human dignity and to do with them whatever one pleases, taking their lives and passing laws preventing anyone from standing in the way of this. Precisely because this involves the internal consistency of our message, the message of the Church and of Christ, about the value of the human person, the Church cannot be expected to change her position on this question. It is not progressive to try to resolve problems by eliminating a human life. Our legislatures need to hear those words. The Catholics in our pews need to hear those words. The media today would never report on those words of Pope Francis because they like to put him forward as one who is progressive. But he sees the evil and the ideology behind the so-called progressiveness. It is void, it is without God, and it lacks the truth. And we must stand against it and not be afraid. You are the light of the world, Jesus says to us. We too often, as Christians and as people of goodwill, have hidden that light. Your presence here today with your friends and families is a light. The beautiful music we hear today is a light. Your continued vigilance on behalf of the unborn, the vulnerable, and our identity as children of God is a light. We must be vigilant. We must be those who are willing to put up with rejection, with anger, with hatred, with ridicule, knowing that Jesus himself put up with all of that, and we can expect no less. If we are truly to be disciples, we must let our light shine in the darkness, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Heavenly Father. I pray that God may bless each one of you. I pray that you will follow the words of the gospel, to pray for your enemies, to pray for those who persecute you. Pray for their conversion and their change of heart. With God, nothing is impossible. May he bring you into a deeper encounter with him, so that you are a light that will never be contained, that you are a light that will shine brightly in the darkness. Thank you.
Thank you, Archbishop. My name is Deacon Jeff Bennett on behalf of the Respect Life Office of Catholic Charities in the Archdiocese of Denver. It's great to see so many people here. And just as Archbishop talked about, we have to be the light of Christ. That was our call at our baptism. We got to be a light that shines with happiness and joy, especially for those who don't agree with what we talk about and don't agree with the truth. We need to reach out to them and use this event as a springboard for the rest of the year to share that light of Christ, to share that happiness and joy, because that's the only thing that'll change this world of darkness. We thank you so very much for coming and appreciate all the buses and all the parishes and schools and individuals that have come here. But today is a springboard, as I said, to be a light of Christ, to use that baptismal light that we've been given to share the truth with legislators who don't agree with us, with neighbors who don't agree with us, with coworkers and family members who don't agree with us. How many people here today pledge to be a light of Christ for this year? Thank you again for coming, and let's look at this as a springboard, and next year we have double the amount of people. Thank you.
Thank you, Deacon Jeff, and thank you again, Your Excellency. One of the things that I have experienced as I've traveled all 50 states and more than 600 cities around the world is I have seen the youthfulness of our pro-life movement. And you don't have to look far, just looking around this crowd at all the young faces. And we realize that young people are not the future of the pro-life movement. They are the pro-life movement. They are the ones who are taking the lead and who will bring an end to this injustice for once and for all. And here today to share with us is one of those amazing young people. She's coming to us all the way from Gunnison, Colorado. She started a Students for Life group in her area. She also is the Respect Life leader at her parish. She's planning to double major and wants to go on to law school. Please give a warm Denver welcome to Miss Elizabeth Felix and her friends from Students for Life. Let's hear her for her.
Thank you. I would like to start by thanking everyone so much for coming out here today and celebrating and fighting for life. It means so much. So why don't you give yourselves all a big round of applause. Thank you. It is such a blessing for me to be able to stand in front of you all and share my thoughts on this movement. I've only been part of pro-life movement and everything like that for a little over a year, so this means a lot to me. And when I first started, I had a question in my mind. What does it mean to be pro-life? And this might seem like a really simple question, it kind of is, but as I became more and more involved, I realized that it's not just one thing. Being pro-life, there are so many different parts to it. Being pro-life means being pro-woman, pro-man, and pro-child. In fact, it could just be called being pro-human, but it's more than that. It's pro-equality. No other political belief holds as strongly to the power of equality as the pro-life movement does. No other belief tells us that everyone deserves an equal chance at life, that everyone deserves an equal right to life. Being pro-life means having courage. It means standing in front of a Planned Parenthood facility and praying for every soul that enters that building. It means starting conversations with people who would rather yell in our faces. It means standing up for what we believe in. Why are we pro-life? Is it because we believe that a life should never be ended by another human being? Is it because we believe the sick should be cared for and loved, rather than being told their best option is death through euthanasia or assisted suicide? Or is it because being pro-life means being pro-love? For every life, there is enough love given to us by God to fill every heart and soul. We choose to love and forgive those that have made one mistake or many, because through God's mercy and grace, every person can still be saved. Pro-life is pro-charity, pro-hope, pro-family, pro-mercy, compassion, pro-emotional and physical wellness. Being pro-life is being pro-science and pro-justice. To be pro-life is to be a voice for the voiceless. But more important than all of that, to be pro-life is to believe in the sanctity of all human life. To be pro-life is to be ourselves. It's a part of who we are and what we do, because we are the pro-life generation.
Are there any young people here who recognize that you are the pro-life generation? Here's what I'd like you to do. I want you to say after me, we are the pro-life generation. We are the pro-life generation.
We are the pro-life generation.
Let's let all of Denver hear you. We are the pro-life generation.
We are the pro-life generation.
Woo! All right. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and thank you to the Students for Life who are inspiring hope all across this great nation. It is now my privilege to introduce to you a unique and amazing family. They are living out this dignity of life that Elizabeth was talking about. They're living out the gospel of life 24/7, 365 days of the year right here in the city of Denver. Jeff and Sonia McGarity, along with their 8 children, live in Centennial, Colorado. They attend St. Thomas More Parish. Let's welcome them to share their beautiful story. Please welcome the McGaritys.
Hold on. Thank God for Cheerios sometimes. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to share about the joy of our family's life. Allow me to begin by asking if you know why Down syndrome is called what it is. Many people think that the name Down syndrome comes from the observation that individuals with this condition are often delayed or, quote, down in certain abilities or their IQ. But that's not the reason. We'll tell you why in a moment. First, a little about us. After our first 2 sons, Thomas and Sean, were born in 2003 and 2004, our third son, Jeffrey, was born in 2006. Jeffrey's prenatal ultrasounds looked just like our previous children's, so about an hour after his birth, when our midwife told us she thought Jeffrey had Down syndrome, we were surprised, and we began a journey that day that we could not have anticipated before then.
In 2007, our 4th son, Brendan, was born, and in 2008, God put it on my heart to Google Down syndrome adoption. That led me to a chat with Robin at the National Down Syndrome Adoption Network, who had herself adopted several children with Down syndrome and who is now helping other parents throughout the country do the same. After talking to Robin, I thought, yeah, Lord, we could do that. We could love a second sweet kiddo with Down syndrome. So in 2010, we met and adopted Cecilia as a newborn. Then, to prove that God had a sense of humor and knows exactly what we need, Augustine was born in 2011, 1 year and 4 days after Cecilia's birth. Since then, we have adopted Rosemarie, who was born in 2015, and our sweet little Charlotte, who was born 3 months ago. Her adoption is not yet finalized, but both of these precious daughters have Down syndrome as well.
That brings us to 5 boys and 3 girls, or 4 typical kiddos and 4 kiddos with Down syndrome. Now to answer the question why Down syndrome has its name. It's actually named after the English doctor who first described the condition in the 1860s, Dr. John Langdon Down. In case you didn't know, Down syndrome is also called trisomy 21 because people with this condition have 3 copies of their 21st chromosome instead of 2. In an article entitled Why Is It Called Down Syndrome, author Mark Leach wishes that Dr. Down's last name had been awesome instead. Think about it. Here's how the conversation where a doctor informs parents that their child has trisomy 21 would sound if his name had been Dr. Awesome. The parents say, "Yes, doctor, what do you need to tell us?" The doctor says, "We believe that your child has awesome syndrome."
As we gather today to voice our respect for life, we are aware that the pro-life movement is sometimes criticized as just being pro-baby. Our family loves babies. I guess that's obvious. But we love mothers and fathers as well, and we have open adoptions with all 3 sets of our girls' birth parents, and we honor them as heroes because they've chosen life instead of abortion for their children. We feel that open adoption is a win-win situation because it allows the birth parents to continue to experience their child's love rather than suffering the loss of the love if they were to have chosen abortion.
Unfortunately, as you may or may not know, there's a tragic connection between abortion and Down syndrome. In 2017, CBS published an article about Iceland entitled, "What Kind of Society Do You Want to Live In Inside the Country Where Down Syndrome is Disappearing?" From the title of this article, you might think that the doctors in Iceland have somehow figured out how to cure Down syndrome. In fact, the article relates that, quote, "Since prenatal screening tests were introduced in Iceland in the early 2000s, close to 100% of women who received a positive test for Down syndrome terminated their pregnancy." And to bring this shocking tragedy closer to home, the article explains that according to recent data, the United States has an estimated termination rate of 67% when a child tests positive for Down syndrome before birth. A counselor in Iceland who meets with women who have a pregnancy with a chromosomal abnormality said, quote, "We don't look at abortion as murder, we look at it as a thing that we ended. We ended a possible life that might have had a huge complication, preventing suffering for the child and for the family. And I think that is more right than seeing it as a murder. That's so black and white. Life isn't black and white, life is gray," she said. While families who have children with special needs, and all families for that matter, certainly have their share of sleepless nights and frustrating days, we are glad to welcome the suffering that has these 4 bright-eyed kiddos as a part of our lives.
Baby Charlotte became part of our family rather quickly, and so telling our children was quite a surprise to them. When we told Brendan, our 11-year-old, that we were adopting again, he quickly asked us, "Does this baby have Down syndrome?" And when we said that she did, we were touched by his response, "Yes." As I consider the amazing pro-life warriors here and across our country who have tirelessly proclaimed the pro-life message, I sometimes feel the need to do more for the pro-life movement. But then I remind myself of Mother Teresa's challenge. If you want to change the world, go home and love your family. Each one of us and each family can change the world by being pro-life, by being for life, which begins with going home and loving our families.
Hold on.
It's okay, I'm done.
In closing, I recently heard a song entitled "Do Something" by Matthew West, which spoke to my heart, and so I share it today. The lyrics begin like this: "Saw a world full of trouble now, thought, how'd we ever get so far down? How's it gonna ever turn around? So I turned my eyes to heaven. I thought, God, why don't you do something? Well, I just couldn't bear the thought of people living in poverty, children sold into slavery. The thought disgusted me, so I shook my fist at heaven and said, God, why don't you do something? He said, I did. I created you." While not every family is called to have 4 kiddos with Down syndrome, we've discovered that the something that God had called us to do is just that. The question we invite you to answer is, what is the something or the something else? You're all here today. What's the something else that God has called you to do? Thank you for letting us share a little bit of our story with you today, and let's all go do something to change the world.